how things come to be. What does the Bible tell us about that? In the beginning, what?
For God created the heaven and the earth.
He made us in His image because He wanted companionship.
Okay. That's interesting. And in the, I don't know if it's just the teacher's helps here, but I'd read this quote before, but I remember where it was. But Ellen White says that human beings were created to repopulate heaven, to take the place of the fallen angels once they passed their probation and passed their test. So I remember reading that before, and I couldn't remember what it was. What else? What else does the Bible say about who God is, what He is, what we are? He said He made us all of one blood. You all feel like we're all of one blood? Even in this group right here? Or especially as we expand out into the countryside and the world? One blood. God made us all of one blood. What else?
God is love.
God is love. And that's one of probably the most important things that we can remember through all of our Bible study, because as human beings, unfortunately, a lot of times when we get punished, it's not out of love, and God does punish. But everything God does is out of love, in love, because of love. He doesn't do anything because He's mean and because He wants to get back at us. But everything that happens is out of His love. What about some of the physical stuff in the universe? It's interesting. It says He set the bounds of the sea. And it's interesting, every now and then, nature, Mother Nature, whoever she is, breaks those bounds. See, these tsunamis wash over, do terrible destruction. And think what it would be like if that was a real common thing. Every place everybody lived, they had to be really concerned that maybe today's going to be another tsunami. But God has set bounds, and for whatever reason, He lets those bounds be broken from time to time. But He set bounds. The ocean stays in its place. The lakes stay in their place. The rivers stay in their place. except during the monsoon, but
It's interesting, even when a tsunami strikes, it's only within a short distance of the shore. It doesn't exceed that bound by much.
that's pretty typical. That one they had here, trying to think where it was now, a few years ago.
Japan?
Huh?
In Japan?
Was it Japan? Seems like it was a different.
And there's one from Indonesia.
Indonesia's the one I'm thinking of. It's pretty flat. The land was pretty flat. It went in quite a long ways. That was a pretty difficult thing for anybody to get away from that was anywhere close there. But yeah, that's typically true. It's the bounds are still, and it doesn't just keep going on and on and on. So, okay, anything else there you can think of that tells us who God is? Made all things. created the foundations of the earth and the heavens. And we don't, having worked in construction most of my life, I understand foundations a little bit, and foundations are pretty important. If you don't have good foundations, you're not going to have a good structure sitting on top of it, no matter how well you build that structure on top. I remember a contractor I worked for a long time ago. We got a job putting a foundation under a home. It had been built early 1900s, I think. Had a wood foundation, and just sitting in the dirt, and a big house too. And it was termites got in it, and had to be replaced. And the house was still a good house, good shape, so we had to go jack it up and put a good foundation under it. But you think about the earth, and the earth kind of is a foundation for us. But we don't understand it, but there's building blocks, if you will, in the universe. It's however God makes it stack up and makes it work. He's built foundations. And of course, this is another important one that points out here, is that Jesus made all things. I think this is something that I don't think we as Adventists maybe do, but I think some Christians lose sight of who Jesus really is. Who he was, who he is, who he continues to be. But they get upset with the Old Testament God. Well, who was the Old Testament God? Jesus. Of course, God, we know God the Father and God the Holy Spirit were involved, but Jesus was the creator. He's our Savior. Question in the bottom here. Why does it make sense to have faith that we have here? Because the Creator purposely put us here. That's another thing, even in Christianity, we're losing sight of nowadays. Again, hopefully not in the Adventist church, but with evolution creeping into everything, including Christianity, what does that do to the faith base of God and Jesus and what he can and what he's done and what he will do for us? What does that do to that? If a Christian embraces to any degree evolution, what does that do to the faith structure that we have and how we respond and what we think of God and who he is? And come on, talk to me, you guys. You're awful quiet this morning.
Just on a personal level, it takes away any reason for having confidence, faith that things are going to work out. It robs life of any meaning.
Yeah, and especially when we see all the stuff that's going on around us now. I mean, this is a... If you don't have faith, you're going to lose your faith. We're getting in a time to lose it. This stuff that's going on in the world, everything, politics, and just everything that's going on. And if you don't have that confidence in Jesus Christ as the Creator,
Well, if there's no God, if you weren't created by God for a specific purpose, then there's no higher standard of conduct than what you happen to want right at this moment. And it becomes like it says in Judges, every man was doing what was right in his own eyes.
yeah.
And that's the most destructive thing that can exist in a society, is the idea that anybody can do anything that they want to.
Well, and what does that do to the God is love? What does that do to that? I mean, if
Pretty well wipes it out.
yeah. So, yeah, this idea, and as I understand, there have been, are some in the church that are embracing to one degree or another evolution. And that is such a destructive, devilish belief. To me, it's stupid. I like to think I'm a logical person. I like to think that anyhow. But to me, the logic of a creator over blind, big bang, whatever, just outweighs it something fierce. And the idea that all of this, you look at the universe and everything, but you start paring it down, little things, your eyes and how that all functions or whatever, that all came to be on accident, to me, is just stupid.
Well, if you look at the Bible and then look at the world around us, there is more than ample evidence that everything the Bible records is true.
Yeah.
That it has really happened. Because, people have been doubting the Bible for centuries. And men made their reputations on poo-pooing the Bible.
Yeah.
Who ends up being embarrassed? The people who believe the Bible or the people who promoted those ideas? As knowledge increases, as the science of archaeology increases, as the physical sciences increase, those people are shown to be more and more foolish.
Yeah. Well, and they have to keep redoing their theories.
And the Bible has never been redone.
No. And beside that, the fact that the Bible is the structure of it, the time period that the Bible was created over, the multiple authors, and yet it's unified on everything it teaches. And to me, I'm going to look at creation here and a little more here in a little bit, but everything God does, and I really never thought about this before. Well, it's the first thing I thought about. Everything God does, He does for a reason. I've thought about that before. But in terms of the Bible, I never really thought about it before, the idea of the way He had it put together over that long time period. And all the multiple authors and the multiplicity of backgrounds of the people that wrote. Why did He do it that way? Moses sat down and wrote the first 5 books. Why didn't He complete it? Why didn't He go write the rest of it? Of course, a lot of it is history. But still, the idea that God put the Bible together that way and has it stand its place, it's just another lesson. It's another teaching tool that God uses.
Well, it was put together over that many thousands of years, or hundreds of years, and the message doesn't change from author to author.
No.
The message is the same.
Yep.
It's the most amazing book in the world.
Yeah. Okay. In the image of the Maker. The Bible states that God created man, male and female, in His own image. Use the idea to answer the following questions. What does it mean that God created us in His own image? In what ways are we in His image? I'm sure there's some of that we don't know. But what does that mean? that we're created in God's image. Does that mean he has flesh and blood?
I think it means the things that distinguish human beings from the rest of creation in particular, because we all have flesh and blood of one sort or another. And man has a mind we can understand. He has a will, he can choose to do right or he can choose to do wrong. Man is creative. And in all of those things, he reflects the principal characteristics of God.
Okay. Apparently, as I read Spirit of Prophecy in the Bible, apparently there is some physical resemblance too. Am I right about this? There's some, and I don't get that because Jesus pointed out that God is spirit. You have to worship him in spirit. And what that means exactly, I don't know. But even in his spiritual body, if you will, apparently we reflect that somehow in our physical bodies. Beyond that, I won't go beyond that because but we're created in his image, and it seems to be in some ways the physical part of it. I think the strong part is what Bob was just describing. Go ahead, Bob.
There's a very popular doctrine about God that, especially in the Reformed community, Reformed referring to Presbyterians and Anglicans and so on. It's the idea of the impassibility of God. Now you look up the meaning of that word, it means that there's no change, that God can't experience anything because to experience something would be to change.
Mm-hmm.
They think that any idea, for example, in Isaiah, it says, he bore them on eagle's wings. In Deuteronomy, it says the same thing. In all their affliction, he was afflicted.
Right.
And they reject that, saying that's just, the word they use is anthropomorphic. Means it makes him too much like us.
Mm-hmm.
What they forget is that we were made in God's image.
Yeah.
We feel things because we are, to coin a word, we are theomorphic. We're made in God's likeness.
Yeah.
He wasn't made in our likeness.
Yeah. Molly.
But there's one aspect of that. I've heard the theologians discussing it and saying that when he came to make man, he did make man in God's image because Jesus was going to take the nature of man, and he's still God, but all through eternity, he's going to have a human nature.
Right.
And so God didn't make him. I sent off for study of what my ancestry was by sending them DNA, and it's British, Irish, French, German, and 2.2% Indian. And but my wife was reading it. She says it says that Wally is 50% more Neanderthal than the average man. She said, I know that must be right because when he's hungry, he grabs me by the hair and takes me into the kitchen.
Yeah. This idea of being able to love, hate, these are things that God created in us, and we're created in his image. Now, I do believe that the Bible uses terminology about God, about things that we can understand the terminology, may speak to an actuality that's a little different than we might perceive. You understand what I'm saying? I think that well, I don't know how to say it any more than that. But clearly God, the Bible speaks of God loving. He hates sin, loves a sinner, but he hates sin. He gets angry. Now again, that's something we need to be careful about. Again, we were created in His image. He's not created in our image. And the kind of anger that God has is not based on sinful emotions that we have. A lot of the time, maybe most of the time, when we get angry, it's doesn't come from a good place. It comes from a bad place in our characters and our whatever. Not all the time. We can have righteous indignation too. But we're inclined to get angry over things that we ought not to get angry over. And the kind of anger that God has is holy anger, if you will. It comes from a completely different place. But that's because we become sinners. That's not the way we were created in the first place.
Well, the fact that we were created in His image doesn't mean we can look within ourselves and find out what God is like.
Yeah, for sure.
He has to reveal Himself to us.
Yeah.
And actually, that was the purpose of the temptation in the Garden of Eden. God was revealing Himself to Adam and Eve, and He could have revealed Himself as easily without their sinning as He's been forced to do in their sinning. And, learning to know God will teach us about ourselves, but knowing ourselves isn't the same as knowing God.
Right. Okay. This first question here on Tuesday's lesson is referring to Genesis 28 and 29. It says, what does it tell us about how God views the material world? And about material things and how we enjoy them. Now, to me, this is a really important question because we are really admonished about not getting caught up in materialism. All that kind of stuff. We're and it seems like we as Seventh-day Adventists, put a heavy emphasis on that. Don't love the things of the world. Well, what does that mean? What did God, the way God created things and what He said about them? What is God's view? What do you think God's view is of us enjoying material things? Are material things a sin? Is it sinful to enjoy material things? Because we really kind of, if we don't say that outright, we kind of border on that. It's like the text that says, if you turn your foot away from doing your own will on the Sabbath and take pleasure in the Sabbath, well, does that mean nothing we should do on the Sabbath should be pleasurable? What is all this materialism and pleasure, having pleasure? How does that relate to what God designed in Christianity and
It has to do with the use that we make of them, whether we make a selfish use of them. You know, it says in Isaiah, they're doing thine own pleasure, speaking thine own words, going your own way. That's what's wrong with it.
but how does that fit with creativity? I mean, if we're created in God's image and we're created to have creativity, if you're a writer, speaking your own words, if you're an artist, painting or drawing, or a musician, or
What it's speaking of are things that are done out of selfishness. God isn't selfish.
Right.
It says he rejoices in the things that he's made. He rejoices in his people. He sings over us. God finds enjoyment in the work of his hands. And we are too. What does it say? Mine elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall
Yeah.
not build and another inhabit, not plant and another eat.
right. Well, and what was Israel promised when they went to Canaan? What were they promised to their land of milk and honey? I mean, what is that? It talks about the fat of the land, enjoying the fat of the land. What does that all imply?
They forgot where it came from.
Well, that's true, but the promise is that they would have that. So this idea that we're not supposed to enjoy things, that any kind of pleasure we take in whatever is sinful is not accurate. Like you said, what do we do? Is it selfish? What is the how is our enjoyment? Where does it come from? What does it cause us to do? How does it cause us to act or react with each other? Any other thoughts on that? Oh, y'all are quiet this morning. What happened? Genesis 1:28 says that God blessed Adam and Eve. What does that mean? What kind of a relationship does it imply between them and their Creator? What does it mean that God blessed Adam and Eve? When we talk about being blessed by God, what does that mean?
That's a good question. What does that mean, to be blessed by God? I mean, it can mean several things. If you have a particular need, and he fulfills that need, then you're blessed by God.
Okay.
But the ultimate blessing, I think, that comes from God is to be filled with his Spirit. To be filled with the Spirit and the likeness of God in your heart. To have that spiritual awakening in your eyes, to see him in the way that he wants to reveal himself to you. So when God blessed Adam and Eve, there could have been many things, but in particular, it's a revelation of who he is to their innermost hearts and beings, where their eyes are open in a wider degree than they've seen him before, and they appreciate him more as a result.
Appreciate him more. What?
They appreciate him more as a result of
Right, right.
the blessing of revealing himself to them.
Okay. So, go ahead.
With that, because what he said is very true. Wisdom, there's nothing wrong with wisdom. There's nothing wrong with knowledge. There's nothing wrong with understanding. Or riches. They can all be blessings. But remember what God said through Jeremiah. Let not the wise man glory in his wisdom. Don't let the rich man glory in his riches, but let them glory in this, that he understands and knows me.
So that's a good lead into my next question, or next part of this question then. What what does God blessing Adam and Eve and blessing us, what is the implication there of the relationship between humans and God? What's the implication of where we fit in the in the picture? Does God need our blessing? Can we bless God in any way?
Yes, the Bible says we can.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, praise his holy name.
So again, what I have to answer my own question. In the relationship that we have with God, everything us existing comes from Him. Everything we have, everything we are, comes from Him. So it's the only way then that we can bless Him is with the praise. We can be thankful. We can praise Him. We can represent Him to others and His nature, His generosity. But it defines our relationship with Him. He's our Creator, and we're the created. Right?
Something that he uses more often than just about any other simile in the Bible is marriage, which is often spoken of in terms of knowing your partner.
Right.
Because, I know many women, but I don't know them in that sense.
Right.
I only know one that way.
Yeah.
And by living our lives together, we're continually interacting. And in a covenant relationship with God, there's to be a continual interaction between us. I mean, everything I do, I think of her one way or another. If for some reason I fail to think of her, it usually turns out badly.
Yeah.
But it illustrates the relationship, the knowledge that we have of one another. And that knowledge is to grow and deepen as our lives persist in this world and in the next.
Right. Okay. Any other comments or thoughts on that? Comment down here in the bottom says, Adam and Eve were dependent upon the blessing and care of their Creator Father. He provided all they needed. So then, He's the provider. We don't provide, but we respond. How do we respond? And our response is the other side of the equation, the other side of the covenant. At the tree. Why did there need to be a tree? And it's interesting, there's two trees in the picture. God created all kinds of trees. But there's two trees in the picture here in this equation.
So each tree represented something. The righteous in the Bible are represented by trees.
Right.
The ultimate righteous one is Jesus Christ. Thus, the tree of life in the Garden of Eden represented Christ and the life of God given to man. The tree of knowledge of good and evil represented the evil one who had resisted God in heaven and rebelled. That was his mark. And so God warned them, this is the tree of life, this is where you go, but you have the choice to go to the other one, but don't do it.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing to me. I think about that and I kind of go in circles about it. But it's interesting that God gave the choice. There really is only one choice. I mean, if you want to live, you got to stay connected to the giver. That's pure and simple. And you think about Adam and Eve, they had absolutely everything they could want. Everything they needed, everything they could want. They weren't in want of anything. And furthermore, they were created with a character that was perfect, with no inclination to sin. And we're all inclined to sin. That's kind of our first choice if we're not staying connected with God daily. But they didn't have that. They didn't have that choice. And as I understand it, the only place Satan could tempt him was at his tree, at that tree. So what they did is really dumb. The idea that they could do that. And the lesson here, one of the places asked us about the steps that Satan went through to break down that relationship that Eve had with God. I didn't quite personally follow the steps that he went through. Maybe you all can speak to me about them. And Ellen White says very plainly, she should have never left Adam's side. Eve shouldn't have. She should have never went to the tree. She should have never listened to Satan. I wonder, did she ever see a serpent before?
Yes, she did. The serpent was a beautiful creature in the Garden of Eden that could fly. But Satan could tempt her at the tree. He couldn't, it's a spirit of prophecy makes it plain, he couldn't follow them around the garden and tempt them. He could only tempt them at the tree.
All right.
Eve's choice to be separated from her husband was her own choice. In other words, the devil didn't come and tempt her. She made the choice. And actually we're told that at first, they were doing things in the garden and she found herself separated from her husband. In other words, it occurred to her, hey, Adam's not here with me. And she remembered the admonition, but then she thought, I can take care of myself. And that was her first mistake. She trusted to herself over what God said. Even though she hadn't partaken of the tree of knowledge of good and evil yet, she had made the choice to trust herself. Then after she made that choice, she found herself at the tree, and the rest went downhill.
Yeah.
In connection with that, it's interesting to notice how the devil attacked her. The way he got Eve to do what he said was to make fun of her.
Mm-hmm.
Make fun of the idea that she should obey. He says, has God really said you shouldn't do this? He just doesn't want you to be like him. And he was making fun of her, belittling God, and making fun of her for trusting God.
Well, and he added truth to untruth in that question, too. You can't eat of any tree. You can't eat of any tree. That's not true.
But when do we most often, if we're in the company of others that are trying to get us to sin, when do we most often yield? It's when they start making fun of us.
Peer pressure. Yeah, the context of that whole thing, and again, the lesson pointed this out more fully, and I've gone back and forth in trying to understand the whole thing a little bit over the years. But Adam and Eve and sin, and the sin is laid on Adam. And as I understand it, that's for several reasons. But Eve was tempted to sin. She fell for the temptation. She was tricked, if you will. Now, she was as often happens when we get tricked, it's of our own doing. It's because of our own laziness or whatever mistakes we make. But Adam chose to sin. You know, and here's where it really gets tricky for Christians, because we like to try to reason things out and say, well, you know, this thing or that thing. And Adam, here's this woman, this beautiful creature created out of his body. And God created this beautiful woman out of his body and presented her to him as his wife. And you think of the best marriage you've ever known, if you've known in your own life period or somebody you've known, and the relationship that the man and the woman have together. I can't imagine what the addition to that would be if I knew my wife was actually created out of one of my ribs and she was physically a part of me. I'm missing a rib here that is, she's made out of, she's physically a part of me. And there's nobody else around. There's not a replacement apparently available. You think human nature, what am I going to do? And he dearly loved her. But again, here comes the choice. What did Adam choose?
What he wanted.
Well, what he wanted, but what?
He chose to trust himself. He chose to trust that, you know, he would take Eve and he would not trust God.
Yeah. He chose to trust himself rather than God. He knew all about this creation. He named Eve not only her given name, but her biological name. He named all the animals. He knew all about what God had done. And it's interesting, too. I think there's a lot of different studies we can do on the creation of Eve. Adam and Eve both, and how he created Eve. But Adam knew all of this and knew that God did this. And if he did it before, could he not easily do it again? But he chose to trust himself, and he chose human nature over God, over the Creator. So he made the choice. And of course, he was the leader. Eve was his helpmate. Adam was the leader. Ellen White talks about Adam being crowned king of the earth, and so that put him in a position where not only should he not trusted himself, but as the leader of the free world, he should have put his trust in God completely. He should have led the right example. But this thing that happened at the tree, and another aspect of it, why do we? Well, in the past, I've thought, it seemed like such a little thing. They took a bite of fruit. Isn't that a little thing? Just take a bite of fruit. I mean, couldn't God slap them on the wrist and... Is that a little thing?
God judges by the intentions of your heart, your motives, then that's not a little thing. So if your motives are to disobey, intentionally, knowingly disobey God, that's not a little thing.
And that's really an important thing as we look in our lives. Because it doesn't matter how big or small the thing is, the doing or whatever, disobedience is disobedience. I saw a hand.
delicious food there, and God said, don't eat it. Well, he'd just gotten up from a Thanksgiving dinner, and there were 50
Yeah.
plates full of delicious food, and he said, don't eat this one.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't
Yeah.
hungry.
Yeah. He didn't have the need. He didn't have, and again, he didn't have the propensity to do that. Again, that's kind of a automatic thing for us that we've got to overcome in the power of God. But he didn't have the propensity to do that. He just made an out-and-out big choice to disobey.
Let's jump back to how Satan tempted Eve. Because it's interesting, if you look at that, there's two things in that temptation. When she came in front of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, one is she was amazed to see a snake, a serpent talking, okay? So first thing is he tried to grab her attention visually. And the second thing is he used a question that was so preposterous that she wanted to immediately engage in dialogue with it, all right? Which was, has God said you can't eat from any tree of the garden? Now, that was ridiculous in her mind, and she immediately wanted to dialogue. Now, what's interesting is that in those same ways, we see the devil doing that to God's people today. What we see and what we hear. Sometimes that which is so ridiculous is thrown out to us as a lure to get us to engage with it, that it might impact our minds and our thinking. Thus, we must guard the avenue to our minds, whether what we see, what we hear, in every way.
We open ourselves up for further failure then. Good lesson. I think this is going to be a good quarterly. Good quarter of lesson study. I urge you to get a quarterly if you don't have one, and come here Sabbath morning prepared to engage in this. Maybe you'll be more talkative next Sabbath. I love you guys. I appreciate you coming. Will you stand with me for closing prayer, please? Father in heaven, we thank you again for this beautiful Sabbath day you've given us. We thank you for the lessons that you've given us in the Scriptures. Help us, Lord, to learn these things, to remember them as we go out and face our temptations throughout the day and throughout the week. Forgive us where we've failed, I pray, Lord, for Jesus' sake. Amen.